Imagine a battlefield where human commanders are no longer making the final decisions, where an artificial intelligence system evaluates threats, recommends actions, and in some cases, controls responses at machine speed. A future that military planners and policymakers around the world are actively debating as they weigh how rapidly advancing technology could transform command and control structures that have defined warfare for generations. And while this may sound like a distant possibility, defense organizations are already experimenting with AI-driven systems that can sift through massive volumes of sensor data, satellite imagery, communications, intercepts, and logistics reports in seconds, prompting urgent questions about how far automation should go and who ultimately remains responsible when. Machines help shape life and death outcomes. Picture a hypothetical scenario often discussed in defense studies in which a large group of unmanned aircraft approaches a protected area. Radar feeds, infrared sensors, and electronic warfare monitors all lighting up at once as an AI platform correlates hundreds of data points, predicts flight paths, recommends countermeasures, and prioritizes defensive assets faster than any human staff could manually calculate. A demonstration of what advocates describe as decision support at machine speed rather than independent lethal action, yet one that still raises concerns about reliability, escalation, and accountability. And this tension sits at the heart of today's global debate over the military use of artificial intelligence. Defense analysts describe the shift as a move from purely human-centric command systems toward AI-assisted command and control, often called C2, where algorithms help commanders visualize the battlefield, identify patterns, flag anomalies, and test possible courses of action, with proponents arguing that such tools resemble an advanced form of data analysis rather than autonomous decision-making, while critics warn that increasing reliance on automation could subtly push humans toward rubber-stamping machine recommendations, especially in fast-moving crises. Historically, militaries have adopted automation in stages, from early computerized logistics planning during the Cold War to automated air defense warning networks and missile tracking systems. But today's machine learning models differ because they can adapt to new data, recognize complex patterns, and generate probabilistic forecasts rather than follow only fixed rules, making comparisons with earlier systems both instructive and limited. Supporters of military AI point to what they call the algorithmic advantage, noting that modern conflicts generate vast streams of information from drones, satellites, cyber sensors, naval radars, and troop tracking systems, far more than human staffs can absorb in real time. And they argue that AI can fuse these feeds into a coherent operational picture, highlight emerging threats, forecast where supplies will be needed, and recommend how to move forces more efficiently across long distances, potentially improving defensive readiness and reducing the risk of surprise. Predictive analytics, already used in civilian sectors such as weather forecasting and transportation, are being explored by defense researchers to estimate equipment failures, anticipate adversary movements based on historical patterns, and optimize fuel and ammunition distribution. While logistics planning tools driven by algorithms aim to shorten resupply times and identify bottlenecks before they disrupt operations, illustrating how a influence may extend well beyond the front lines into what strategists often call the invisible backbone of military power. Yet alongside these promised efficiencies lies a dense ethical and legal minefield, particularly around the principle known as human in the loop, which holds that people, not machines, must retain meaningful control over the use of lethal force, a standard many governments publicly endorse even as they continue to test increasingly automated systems, prompting ongoing debate over what meaningful control actually looks like when software is filtering information, ranking targets, or recommending strikes in fractions of a second. Ethicists and legal scholars warn about unintended consequences, from bias training data that could skew threat assessments to adversarial cyber attacks designed to fool algorithms, as well as the possibility that tightly coupled automated systems on opposing sides could interact in unpredictable ways, accelerating crises before diplomats or senior commanders have time to intervene. These worries have fueled international discussions at the United Nations and other forums about so-called lethal autonomous weapon systems, where diplomats, scientists, and advocacy groups argue over whether new treaties, regulations, or transparency measures are needed to govern how AI can be used in combat. With some states calling for binding restrictions and others favoring voluntary guidelines and national oversight, beyond theory, militaries are already testing real systems, including U.S. research programs run through agencies such as DARPA that explore automated planning tools, swarming drone defenses, and decision support platforms for commanders, as well as the evolution of intelligence analysis efforts like Project Maven, which is focused on using machine learning to help interpret aerial imagery while keeping humans responsible for final judgments. And similar initiatives are underway in other major powers. Reflecting a broader race to integrate advanced computing into defense planning, analysts caution, however, that current AI remains far from infallible. Struggling in unfamiliar environments, dependent on high-quality data, and vulnerable to deception, electronic warfare, or simple software errors. Limitations that reinforce why many defense officials stress augmentation rather than replacement of human judgment, even as geopolitical competition creates pressure to move quickly. Economists and security researchers also note that widespread adoption of advanced AI command systems could reshape global power balances, lowering barriers to entry for some capabilities while rewarding nations with strong technology sectors. Large data resources and resilient cyber defenses, potentially influencing alliances, deterrence, calculations, and arms control negotiations in the years ahead. Looking forward, experts outline divergent paths. One in which humans and machines work in close partnership with transparent algorithms, rigorous testing, and clear chains of responsibility, and another more controversial vision in which automation expands so far that people oversee systems only at a distance, intervening rarely and struggling to fully understand how recommendations are generated, a prospect that fuels public concern and drives calls for oversight across governments, universities, and international institutions. Researchers emphasize the need for robust verification methods, stress testing in complex scenarios, ethical review boards, and updated legal frameworks before deploying AI-enabled systems at scale, along with continued dialogue between technologists, military leaders, lawmakers, and civil society about acceptable boundaries. The central question remains unresolved and urgent, not whether artificial intelligence will play a role in future military command and control, because that shift is already underway, but how much authority it should hold, how transparently it must operate, and how humanity can ensure that responsibility, restraint, and international law keep pace with machines that calculate at extraordinary speed. A debate that is likely to shape security policy for decades to come, and one that demands careful scrutiny rather than simple optimism or fear.